Do it, Gorbatchenko.
should have been behind Afghanistan. جوانده یا نفسی.
All right. We are talking about the 1988 war movie, The Beast of War, or simply known as Beast here in the UK, or The Beast. And this one is directed by Kevin Reynolds. Now, Reynolds has had an interesting career. He actually has done a couple of real high-profile movies, primarily starring Kevin Costner. He done, of course, Waterworld, and immediately following this movie, he actually did Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. So he has done some kind of like some pretty high profile stuff. But here he is, 1988, telling the story set in 1981, I believe, where kind of the Soviets have invaded Afghanistan. Now, the story of this one actually focuses on a tank crew, a kind of Soviet tank crew, of kind of four-man crew, one of which is played by Jason Patric. You've also got George Dzunda, I can't actually pronounce this guy's name, and you've got Stephen Baldwin as well. That's the kind of the three that I recognise. So they are kind of on a mission, but they get sort of separated, end up going the wrong way, and kind of get trapped in a kind of like a cul-de-sac of mountains, and they can't kind of get out. And it's these kind of band of Afghanistan kind of rebels are kind of trying to chase them and kind of get revenge for killing their villagers and stuff like that, and kind of want to, you know, obviously, kill the infidels and all that kind of stuff. And really, it focuses really kind of half and half, really focusing mainly on Jason Patric as our kind of POV character, who is obviously originally part of the tank crew, but after he's kind of left dead by the commander, he ends up kind of joining the rebels and kind of turning against his former comrades. So that's kind of your basic plot synopsis. So let's talk a little bit about what works about this particular film. This is actually a really good war movie, and it's one of these ones that have kind of gone forgotten about. So one of the interesting things of this movie is it is spoken in English, despite the principal characters being of Afghanistan origin, and obviously kind of like, I'm assuming, Russian speaking, or maybe Ukrainian or something. But they obviously the Russians in this speak English, which we'll come on to again. So it makes it easy to understand. But the actual tank action on this one it's all kind of like, this is before the days of kind of CGI and stuff, so it's obviously all kind of practical, real kind of tanks. So it does have an authentic kind of feel to it. I was reading some research before I did my review, and they brought on a lot of military experts, and even like the shells, they could have put water in, so when they kind of shot the shells out, they had this kind of like sort of burst that comes out the top and stuff like that. So they have the attention to detail here is pretty good in regards to kind of the aesthetics and stuff. The character work and the acting, I think, is absolutely fantastic. You've got, and I'm going to butcher his name again here, George Dzunda, whatever, Georgie Porgy. He plays the tank commander, who is like ruthless. And throughout the movie, you slowly get the impression he's kind of losing his marbles slightly, because he's becoming more kind of erratic. And then you've got Jason Patric's character, who, I've got to be honest with you, has probably never been better than in this film. I liked him in Lost Boys, but I think this is his best performance in regards to acting. He's kind of like a more conscientious kind of soldier who is somewhat of an objector to the kind of senseless kind of slaughter and stuff like that. And you've got kind of Stephen Baldwin's character, who is kind of a little bit of a coward, and you've got this other guy who's just kind of like a bit of a hothead. So we have four very distinct kind of like Soviet characters, and even on the kind of the Afghanistan side, there is kind of division within them as well. So they have some sort of character development. We have ones that are kind of more chancers and kind of want to kind of just loot kind of Russian bodies and stuff like that, and other ones who are more kind of about the kind of the honour of their people and all that kind of stuff. The violence of this one is pretty brutal. There's a scene towards the beginning of the movie where they actually capture an Afghanistan prisoner, and they kind of want to try and get information out of him. They lay him down under the kind of the tank track and slowly advance, sort of crushing him. It's pretty brutal. And then we actually see a shot later on, and you just got like mincemeat left where he was kind of obviously run over. It's pretty. It's not particularly gratuitous, but the thought that you could have thinking while it's happening is like, oh man, that's a terrible way to go. And then there's a couple of instances as well which are quite chilling. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where there's actually a water hole that involves this kind of like this Russian helicopter crew that kind of come down, and there's a scene, I won't say what happens, but it's quite kind of chilling and very kind of eerie when you kind of like you're watching it. And the cinematography is absolutely fantastic on that one. It's actually more of an anti-war film in a lot of ways. In actual fact, this is kind of more about standing up against oppressors and stuff like that. Obviously, really from the Afghanistan kind of point of view. Which kind of leads me on to, I think it doesn't work with this. The big thing here is going to be the fact that you have Russians or Soviets speaking in English with American. There's no attempt to kind of like hide accents, and even kind of like the mannerisms are Americanized. Now, this isn't the first time obviously Kevin Reynolds did this, because he went on to direct, of course, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and famously you've got Kevin Costner playing Robin Hood, you know, the most famous English legend probably in speaking in an American accent. So clearly Reynolds isn't a big fan of, you know, getting his actors to try and do an accent. So I feel that would be the most legitimate criticism of this movie. But obviously, if it wasn't in English, they probably wouldn't have been able to be made, I suppose. But there you go. Other than that, I would say, yeah, I mean, just for the levels of violence on display here, it's fairly tame in regards to its kind of like gruesomeness, if that makes sense, because we do see a lot of very, you know, quite brutal scenes happen. And although there is a little bit of kind of blood and kind of bits and pieces, but it's not as gratuitous as I think those situations would actually be. Possibly, but obviously this was made in the kind of the late 80s. Maybe if it was made today, we would probably have that more of a shocking scene. But looking at it now, it does seem a little bit kind of bloodless to a certain degree. Even this scene I'm just talking about seems a little bit kind of tame in regards to the guy getting run over by the tank track. The other thing as well I would say is this movie is made at a certain period of time. So it was made in the 80s, and this was kind of when the Cold War was going on. So this movie depicts Russians to be the oppressors, the bad guys. Obviously that's kind of what, you know, what was kind of going on then. And obviously in this film, the Afghanistans are portrayed to be the protagonists, the kind of the wronged people, so to speak. And, you know, it's they are portrayed to be freedom fighters and standing up for their kind of land. And obviously we can get into a whole political debate about, you know, perception. I mean, I always make this argument with Star Wars, because like the Empire, technically speaking, is the government, so to speak, or the oppressing force, and then the rebels are in fact terrorists. But they're just in Star Wars we call them rebels and we call them the heroes. And you know, in this story, that's what the Afghanistans would be. But obviously the political landscape has somewhat changed since then, so it is a kind of a of its time, and obviously is coming at it from a certain point of view. But it's very much an anti-war film in a lot of ways. There's not tons of fighting here, but you always have that threat of very realistic violence, despite it being somewhat bloodless. But overall, this is a very good war film. It's very well made, fantastically photographed. I mean, Reynolds, as I said, is a top-drawer director in a lot of ways, and a good cast here, all of whom do a good job. Just a bit weird. You kind of forget that they're meant to be Russians a lot of the time. Anyway, so I think this one an 8 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.